Is Joe Joyce in danger? Now that might sound harsh, but it is a serious question. The toughness is still there. The heart is still there. But the reflexes look slow. The losses are adding up. And heavyweight boxing is an unforgiving sport. Let's be honest. Joe Joyce is in a very difficult position. There was a time when many people believed he could become heavyweight champion. He had a promising beginning to his career. He was beating good fighters and building momentum. The confidence clearly was growing and the reputation was growing. But boxing changes quickly. And the question is no longer how far Joe Joyce can go. The question is whether he should still be fighting. Now I remember vividly when Joe Joyce beat Daniel Dubois. In that fight, it looked like a star was emerging. It looked like he was going to grow exponentially. Many people remember the jab, but the movement was important too. Joyce was not simply walking forward and absorbing punches. He was controlling distance, making Dubois think. He consistently found the target with the jab and eventually broke Dubois down. It was a mature performance that showed boxing intelligence, discipline, and toughness. Now, boxers, they have identities. And Joe Joyce's boxing identity, generally speaking, apart from the Dubois fight, has always been pressure. He likes to push opponents backwards and forces exchanges. He likes to create a pace that many heavyweights would just struggle to maintain. For a very long time, that style worked extremely well. Opponents would eventually slow down, or Joyce kept coming and kept coming. His engine became his greatest weapon. He was not the fastest heavyweight, but he was relentless and effective. So what is the problem here? The problem is that pressure fighting becomes dangerous when your reflexes are not elite. Even during his best years, Joyce never had great reflexes. He often relied on his chin to compensate for those defensive mistakes, and he would make defensive mistakes. In other words, he trusted his durability and he trusted his toughness. The concern is that this is an issue that has never been fixed. The same defensive flaws that existed years ago, they still exist today. And when you watch the recent fights, the punches seem even easier to land. And Joe Joyce was never a great defensive fighter. Opponents are finding openings and are just timing him consistently. Joyce is still brave, he's still courageous, but bravery and defense, they're not the same thing. If your reactions are slow, eventually fighters start taking advantage. Now at heavyweight, all it takes is one clean punch. That is why reflexes matter in this division. And another concern, and this might surprise people, is the punch resistance. Has Joe Joyce's punch resistance started to decline? Nobody knows for certain, but I think it's a reasonable question. He has taken a tremendous amount of punishment throughout his career, and this is predominantly based on his boxing identity. He has absorbed heavy punches and shots from dangerous punches. Eventually, every fighter reaches a point where the damage starts to accumulate. Could Joe Joyce be approaching that point? It is certainly possible. And when it comes to speed, the issue of speed or lack of speed is difficult to ignore as well. Joe Joyce has always punched slowly. Yes, he generates force, but the delivery is not especially quick. Earlier in his career, he could get away with it because of his pressure and durability. Today, it looks more problematic, very problematic. The punches are easier to anticipate, easier to counter. More importantly, there does not appear to have been a major improvement in this area. Now, unfortunately, and it's very unfortunate, the losses are beginning to add up. Every fighter, generally speaking, loses eventually. But context matters. When losses become more frequent, people start asking different questions. They stop asking whether you can become champion. They stop asking that question. They start asking whether your best years are behind you. That shift in perception can happen very quickly in boxing. For Joe Joyce, It feels like that conversation is already taking place. And this is why his future, Joe Joyce's future, it worries some of the fans. Heavyweight boxing, unfortunately, it's brutal and it's unforgiving. The punches are too powerful and the margins are just way too small. If a fighting has declined, if they have declining punch resistance, slow reflexes and limited defensive improvement, the risk level, it just increases. It increases exponentially. These are not theoretical concerns. They are real concerns that can affect a fighter's performance, affect their confidence, and unfortunately affect their long-term well-being. So could Joe Joyce get hurt in the ring? Could he get hurt in the ring? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. However, every heavyweight can get hurt, but some situations, they carry more risk than others. Joyce remains courageous. He is courageous. He is determined. Nobody can question his heart. That's not the issue. The issue is whether heart alone is enough. At some point, toughness stops being an advantage and starts to become a danger. That is the concern surrounding Joe Joyce today. So let's put our cards on the table. Let's put the cards on the table. I think the victory over Daniel Dubois, that's an important reference point, because in that victory, he showed a good jab, a really good jab, good boxing IQ. He handled the pressure. He was defensively more responsible. So the Daniel Dubois fight, that to me is a reference if you're training Joe Joyce. But what are the issues? Well, there are many issues. There's the speed issues, the speed of the punches. This is an issue because the slower the punches, the easier the opponent can get out the way. This needs to be worked on. It needs to be worked on in camp. Then we have the reflexes issue. So the reflexes are part of your defense. They are essential. Again, this needs to be worked on in camp. This needs to be identified. It needs to be identified by the boxer, identified by the trainer, and then you collaboratively work on rectifying that. And then we have the issue of taking too many punches. Taking too many punches, it increases the opportunity of getting knocked down, getting hurt, or getting knocked out. So that needs to be addressed. He needs to take less punches. He needs to work on his speed. He needs to work on his reflexes. These are essential components that need to be worked on. Think of this. People talk about being tough, but in reality, tough guys get hurt in boxing. If you're tough, you're courageous, but you do not apply the quote-unquote science of boxing, and when we say science of boxing, we're speaking figuratively, those are the type of people that get hurt. So it's not just about being tough. Being tough is important, but being tough and not having the necessary defensive requirements will get you hurt. I personally think Joe Joyce needs to go back to the jab, study that Daniel Dubois fight. He may need to change his boxing identity because his boxing identity of pressure and having defensive or lack of defensive responsibilities will get him hurt. He needs to improve his feet and he needs to improve his hand placement. When I say improve his feet, I mean he needs to learn how to get out of the way of punches. He needs to learn how to have the appropriate hand placement and to maintain that. And I'm not saying that they do not work on that in camp, but they haven't worked on it effectively enough. So if Joe Joyce is going to continue, he needs to make the appropriate amendments. And the trainer recommendations, or, if it's going to be a new trainer, the same trainer, there needs to be clear, concise communication on where we are and where we're going. And it's important that the trainer is able to identify the problems and have enough time to work on the solutions. And also you need to build an optimal boxing environment. Joe Joyce needs an optimal boxing environment because he needs to be the best version of himself if he's going to continue. Also, Joe Joyce needs to improve his boxing IQ. He needs to set traps, use the counter-punching windows, be smart in the clinch, because ultimately, no one wants to see Joe Joyce get hurt. And if he improves his boxing IQ, he will reduce the risk of getting hurt. If Joe Joyce continues, and like I said, improving his boxing IQ will be dependent on him and the relationship he has with his team and his trainer. But if Joe Joyce does decide to continue, hopefully he can make some good money while also maintaining his health. That's important because the financial windows in boxing are very short. And if he is able to rediscover the Daniel Dubois performance, then he has a chance. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe and click the hype button. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.